So thank you very much for your presentation. Please do join their press conference tomorrow. Get a free lunch out of the deal too. We have all airplanes need something to make them go, and LAMA has thrown its initiative behind, or its support, I should say, behind an initiative that refers to what might be more succinctly called E0 or numeral 0, premium unleaded fuel. As you've all heard, there's a big movement about 100 octane and the supposed disappearance of 100 low lead and what we have to do about that to keep those higher powered engines flying. But the largest segment of aviation in America, somewhere around 70%, doesn't need that fuel, could use auto fuel. And this would support the low cost end of aviation where paying a lot of money for fuel is not easily done. To give more information about that, I would like to welcome up to the stage Kent Meisegades. I think I finally got his last name correct. You can just call him Kent if you stumble over it like I did. But please welcome Kent Meisegades to tell us more about the E0 premium unleaded fuel.
Thank you, Dan. Almost correct. Pretty close. Kent Meisegades. I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina. Some of you, if you read Sport Aviation, may see some of the work that I do. My boss is standing right back here, Mary Jones, to keep me in line. But EAA kindly invited me to come up and help them in the summers and at some of the other shows around the country as well as in Europe, where I worked as an aerodynamicist for many years, looking for new technology. But I'm also president of EAA Chapter 1114 in Apex, North Carolina, about 180 members now, one of the larger EAA chapters in the country. And one of the things that concerns me greatly about sport aviation is to keep it affordable, because I know if costs go up for recreational flying, I'll lose members. They'll go out and buy a boat or an ATV or something else, and I'll lose them forever. In the course of doing some reporting on the subject of fuels and engines for sport aviation last year for the EAA, I got a good education in various fuel situations, and there's a lot going on here talking about 100 low lead and its replacement for 100 octane fuels, but also learned a lot more about using vehicle fuels, as we call them, of course, MOGAS, in aircraft. This really was work pioneered by none other than Paul Poberezny in the early 1980s to use automotive fuel in our aircraft. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, it's still not available at many airfields, but we think the time is right for a couple of reasons to look again at using automotive fuel in our aircraft, and certainly in the context of this discussion here this morning. It's a very important aspect for light sport because, as we all know, the promise of light sport, and together with that the Sport Pilot Certificate, is to lower the cost of learning to fly, to flying, recreational aviation, and of course to the members of LAMA to be able to afford a light sport aircraft. If you're only flying 50 to 70 hours a year, your fuel costs can be pretty substantial. Important statistic to note about recreational aircraft. In this country, some 70 to 80% of all piston engine aircraft will operate legally and safely on automotive fuel. That's a lot of airplanes. And that's without any other modification. Certainly for the older airplanes, all one needs is an STC. For MOGAS, either from EAA or from Todd Peterson, who's part of our team, and you can legally fly on inexpensive automotive fuel, provided in most cases that there's no ethanol in it. Looking at LAMA manufacturers, probably between 95 and 99% of all the new manufactured light sport aircraft have engines that were designed to run optimally on automotive fuel. That's looking at Rotaxes and Jabiroos and some of the other engines. And therefore, again, it's important that we get the right fuel in the right engine. We formed a small team here. Back here, a gentleman, Dean Billing, back here at the ball cap. Dean, like me, had an airplane that ran wonderfully on automotive fuel. And with the introduction of ethanol into the fuels, we found it harder and harder to find MoGas to run on our engines. We teamed up also with Todd Peterson, who owns most of the STCs for MoGas. And then most recently, Dan Johnson really has taken here the leadership role amongst the alphabet groups to understand the significance of using automotive fuels in our aircraft. Number one, to lower the cost, but number two, to help get lead out of our engines. And even if you may not agree with the arguments that leaded fuels are a danger to humans and to the environment, we have to find an alternative to leaded fuel. We have an alternative today for 70-80% of all aircraft, and that's called MoGas, and it's out there. We took it upon ourselves, a couple of us guys, to find out what would it take to get automotive fuel back to airports. And we found very quickly there are two major impediments. Number one is the cost of getting an additional fuel pump tank system onto an airfield. There we've teamed up with the major, actually largest producer of self-service fuel tank systems in the world, a company right here in Wisconsin, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, a company called U-Fuel. And it's interesting in noting China, their business is booming in China. I don't recall the numbers, but they're putting in a new system about every other day somewhere in China for aviation or for the trucking industry right now as that industry expands. We've been working with U-Fuel to develop smaller fuel tank systems, between 1,500 and 4,000 gallon fuel tanks. We showed yesterday in our forum a self-service system under $50,000 for MoGas. That's about half the cost of what FBOs traditionally have paid. And we're looking at some new card reader technology, because it turns out that's a big chunk of the money, that we think we can knock that price down even below $40,000. And if you look at the financial statistics, that means you could probably pay off that system in about 6 to 7 years, even without any sort of AIP funding in an airport. We think that's pretty significant compared to the typical $100,000 cost that airports talk about. So really, to wrap this up, the people that are interested to know more about the history of MoGas and also what's legal, what engines can use it, and then also the whole issue of ethanol, where it's legal and safe to use, when you should avoid it, how you can find fuel that doesn't contain ethanol, because generally that's what the engine manufacturers recommend. Even Rotax, that says you can put up to 10% ethanol, they will always say if you can find fuel without ethanol, that's what they prefer. We've put everything onto a new website. It's called Fly Unleaded, one string, flyunleaded.com. And we chose that name, that is, Dean chose that name, because we think one of the important things that we're doing is not only lowering the cost of ownership and operation of an aircraft in flight schools for light sport, but we'll show an immediate contribution to reducing the use of leaded fuels. We'll show the EPA that GA, in particular LSA, is sincere about wanting to get rid of leaded fuels by switching for a lot of our aircraft to MoGas. So check out flyunleaded.com. There's a lot of good resources on there. We've been working with a fellow here in Wisconsin, in Madison, who's put together a website called puregas.org, pure-gas.org. It's a wonderful resource. Anyone that's found a gas station that sells automotive fuel without ethanol, it's logged on there right now. There are over 1,300 gas stations and marinas on there, and they add about 10 to 12 new ones every day. It's really taken off. In addition to that, we've been in touch with the refineries, talking to them about the importance of having a premium fuel. The really good news about what we've learned is that aviation is not alone. There are actually a number of other communities that need an ethanol-free fuel, and they're much larger than aviation. For instance, boaters, owners of ATVs, snowmobiles, chainsaws, emergency power generators, classic cars, classic motorcycles, classic farm tractors, and if you've ever worked in the farming area, you know that's a big deal. These are all large communities that make sport aviation dwarf by size. And that's an exciting aspect in that now we have a much larger voice talking to our state legislators, talking to the EPA, saying, we understand your argument for ethanol, put it in all the fuels you want, please keep it out of premium gas, that's our main point, leave a fuel for all of us that need it, and that's catching on. We've talked to a number of refineries, there's one actually posted here that supplies quick trip gas stations here in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. They are committed to continued sale of ethanol-free 91 octane fuel. They call it recreational gas. They didn't do it because of airplanes. They do it because of boaters and ATVs. And they will supply it to airports. And there are even some airports now that are selling that fuel to boaters. The exciting aspect of this that really Dan and I are talking about, it helps put our foot in the door and expose more people to aviation that might have not looked at it. Because it is sport aviation. We fly because it's fun. There's no other reason. That's the same reason people own boats, snowmobiles, old tractors, old cars. We all do it for the same reason, and if we can expose those people through a common issue, and that's fuels, we think that's good for everyone. It's certainly good for aviation. So I want to thank again Dan Johnson in particular for really taking a leadership role here with amongst the alphabets in understanding the role that automotive fuel, in particular premium, ethanol-free gasoline, can play to help strengthen sport aviation and also to work with other non-aviation communities to try to expand what we're trying to do here in recreational flying. So thank you, Dan Johnson, for that.
You're welcome.
My pleasure.
Okay, we're just about at the end of our press conference. Thank you for hearing all of that. We thought all those points, even though they don't sound like they're about light sport aircraft at the very beginning, which is the whole purpose of LAMA being an organization, but we think all of those are interesting developments, and there are many more to come, we think.